Story 1. Life was still digital enough, but it did not dominate everything. Not every aspect was as monetized as it is today. Story 2. Anybody remember when McDonald's had their $1 menu? That was a good time. Story 3. We were online only when we were at home on the family's personal computer. When we left for the day, we lived in the moment. Story 4. Holy shit. I realize I am old when living in the 2000s sounds ancient to some. Story 5. Bush seemed like the worst president the United States could have had. Story 6. The years 2001 to 2005 felt like 10 years. I would say it was probably the last era when kids spent more time outside than inside. Not that that was better or worse, but video games and similar things were what you did when you could not be outside. Everything was at your fingertips, but you could not grasp anything unless you really wanted it. For example, if you wanted to learn how to code, you had to go find the books, and you were lucky if your high school taught a class in hypertext markup language. The information was there, but it is not like today, when I can look up hundreds of thousands of YouTube videos on how to do something in Python. If you wanted to collect horror movies, it took effort. You could buy anything on eBay, but you could not just one-click download all of the best horror movies from the 1980s to today. Story 7. Simpler, more genuine connections with people, and less useless information fed at a rapid pace. Be more in touch with your surroundings. Story 8. It was one of the most dramatic transition periods in modern history, at least in industrialized nations. This was when cell phones, computers, and the internet became commonplace for regular people instead of being exclusive to wealthy businesspeople and tech enthusiasts. The changes this brought to everyday life for many people are difficult to overstate. Story 9. I was in high school from 1999 to 2003. Those early years. We had a family cell phone that was given to whoever went out and stayed turned off except for emergency calls. People wrote phone numbers on their hands or arms. Everyone got their driver's license at 16 and drove themselves to school. Pranking each other's cars was common. For example, saran wrapping the whole car or smearing sauces on the windows. Most homes had a family computer, and you went online by logging on with that horrible dial-up sound. Listen to Cannonball by the Breeders. They used that sound right before the first vocals. If you went online, the house phone had a busy signal when someone called, and picking up the family phone ended the internet connection. Teens chatted at night on America Online Instant Messenger. The creaky door sound meant a friend came online and the slam meant they left. There were parties every weekend, usually at whichever house had no parents present. We smuggled drinks from our parents. We got risque and triple kissed. Being openly gay was accepted but still brave. We often worked in food service jobs after school for about $6 an hour. We shopped at the mall and wore anything from Hot Topic, Contempo, Old Navy, and American Eagle. We had low-rider flare jeans and sometimes our thongs showed. We all attended or participated in every football game, basketball game, and school play. Imitating the television show Jackass was popular. We used pencil and paper in school unless we had a specific computer class. Honestly, some really great times with lots of personal connections. Story 10. It was way better, surely not because I was younger and had fewer responsibilities. Story 11. As a kid living through it, my memories are mostly of cartoons, video games, and movies. Looking back as an adult and considering the historical context, the period was pretty hectic. It began with the attacks on September 11, 2001, and ended with the Great Recession. The difference is that back then we considered these to be minor setbacks that we would overcome before things got on track. These days there is a pervasive sense of gloom as the aftereffects continue to pile up. Story 12:1. Felt like the cusp of something new, especially in technology. 2. Music seemed to be at its peak, especially rhythm and blues and hip-hop. 3. Society was far less politically correct than it is now. 4. President Bush seemed like the worst thing that could happen to the United States, and the Iraq War protests in some ways resembled Vietnam-era protests. Story 13. September 11th was tragic, but the music was very good. I remember when the song Yeah by Usher was #1 for 12 weeks in 2004. Story 14. Everything the 1990s made cool was burning out. Nothing came to replace it. Story 15. The internet felt much more authentic, whereas now everything feels fake and staged, or at least people do things for money. There was no social media, no smartphones, no constant photos, and no internet on the go. It was a great time, but maybe it always seemed that way because I was in my mid-20s. Story 16. I rode the bus. Online console play was king. No game cost more than $60 plus tax. I played outside until sunset. I did not get a cell phone until 7th or 8th grade. I made my first MySpace account and later migrated to Facebook. I played Neopets and RuneScape at the library, and we had massive end-of-year school parties, laughing out loud. Good times. Story 17. Everything aimed to look futuristic, from logos on television to the tech devices we used. Phones and game consoles had more personality and differed from one another. The internet existed but was less centralized, and each website had its own unique design. Overall, design aesthetics were distinctive. Story 18. They were like face-hugger phones. It might as well be Alien versus Predator these days. Everyone is glued to them. It makes it an entirely different world. Story 19. Everything was going fine until 2 planes flew into the towers. Story 20. We were not inundated with too much information, and social media did not run people's lives. We were connected, sure, but not forcibly intertwined. We had lives that were protected and our own, without the near-constant surveillance and pressure from various entities that warped perceptions of reality. I felt we were able to live according to our own rules and frameworks. I never thought we would be in this shit show that has become our daily life. Story 21. You pretty much only went on the internet in computer class at school or to play silly internet games after school. In the early 2000s, we played Game Boy or Nintendo 64. I was young, and you knew a lot less if you did not have the television on. You spent summers outside exploring. I always loved capturing moments with a disposable camera. You were young and curious about electronics, capturing and sharing moments, but it did not consume your life or feel as easily accessible as it does today. It is a sliding scale, and I will not pretend that I did not watch a lot of television, play computer games, or spend hours on consoles or a Game Boy. Back then it felt new, authentic, and interesting, a small part of life that has since become a large part of everything. I am grateful to have grown up during that time. Story 22. Flip phones and the games you would play on them. Harry Potter was everywhere. Video game consoles like PlayStation 2 and Game Boy Advance Special. Adobe Flash games. Story 23. Having a cell phone used strictly for communication and not carried on your person was a positive change that cannot be overstated. Story 24. 2000 was by and large an optimistic time. New types of music enabled by digital technology were emerging. Mobile phones were taking off as a prelude to the smartphones common today. Internet access was getting faster, and internet content was becoming more varied. Computer and console games were getting slicker, faster, and more polished. Bill Clinton was on track for a budget surplus after years of Republican Party overspending. The 1990s had been rocky, with Waco, the Oklahoma City bombing, the Heaven's Gate cult deaths, and the Aum Shinrikyo subway gas attacks, among others. By 2000, there was a feeling that things were headed in the right direction. The mood during and after September 11, 2001, was that of a global trauma. It was felt vividly by millions of people who had never even visited the United States, myself included. It became, and to a lesser extent still is, an event that shaped public opinion and national discourse. It became clear that the one-off atrocities that had peppered the 1990s were only the tip of the iceberg, and that a ghastly, unimaginable event could occur at any time. Even for those who grew up aware that nuclear war could break out at any moment, September 11, 2001, was a horrifying sequence of events that left scars. With help from governments and the media, it channeled much of the international public's behavior, priorities, and thinking into new directions where many remain stuck today. Story 25. People actually talked. Sometimes it's hard to tell the difference between someone walking around zoned out and a group of people all glued to their phones. The internet was not an overwhelming, all-encompassing marketing tool. Less stress. You were not tethered to a device. If you missed a message, You could just see whatever someone left you on your away message on AOL Instant Messenger and chat with them later. Much simpler times with enough technology to actually help, not hinder, life. I miss calling someone's home, setting up a plan for everyone to meet, getting on my bike, and that was that. Call home sometime around lunch to let my parents know where we ended up. Be home as it got dark. Story 26. Comparison is the thief of joy. Because social media was not as widespread, you had fewer people to compare yourself to. You were less exposed to the news, so you were not bombarded with negative headlines. There were no influencers. Games did not use microtransactions. You could smoke in pubs. People trusted vaccines more. Proving or disproving points was not as easy. Story 27. We were more social. Social media and devices encourage us to sit alone with a phone. Watching television and consuming media used to be a social activity. We watched the same content together. Now we sit alone with a phone and earbuds, consuming media targeted to us, which isolates us and makes us less likely to talk about what we just watched. Story 28. Many shifts occurred in the early 2000s. A brief summary from an American point of view. The September 11, 2001 attacks united Americans from all walks of life for many years, but they also led to restrictions on travel and gave the Transportation Security Administration greater authority. Cell phone technology advanced rapidly. A new generation of parents became more supportive and more protective of their children. Story 29. You could swear on the internet and on YouTube without the thought police coming down on you. It was a wilder, more unregulated internet. You were expected to find your own way and be mature enough to navigate it. Forums were everywhere, anonymity was king, and the web felt more unfiltered yet, in a strange way, more sociable. Story 30. Fun. The late 1990s were even better. Every child had an active imagination. Story 31. Google had a search tool that returned forum results. It was great. Then they shut it down and many forums lost traffic. This began the monetization of the internet. Story 32. Time passed more slowly because we did not have nearly as much electronic media, entertainment, and information to consume. We lived in the moment and spent more time communicating with people in our immediate environment. It was a simpler, more innocent time compared to the present day. The internet and social media unlocked Pandora's box, and there is no going back. Story 33. If you played video games or spent all your time on the internet, everyone thought you were a loser and would say so. Story 34. Not everyone had a personal computer at home. They were far less common. Story 35. I would describe it as better than today and worse than the 1990s. Story 36. It was a simpler time. You had a mobile phone, but it was not your life. MySpace ruled the internet, and music was limited to Limp Bizkit or Britney Spears. Story 37. The internet was called the web. It arrived on Netscape disks, and not everyone could afford or access it. Everything else reflected 1990s culture. September 11, 2001 opened a portal to hell, and nothing has been the same since. People felt more connected in real life before social media. The wars in the early 2000s gripped the world, and for the first time the media provided coverage from the battlefields. Story 38. Greasy Sunscreen, Defy America, Digimon, and Yu-Gi-Oh! Were supposed to replace Pokemon, but being geeky or alternative was still relegated to small sections in bookstores, the back of Kmart, or specialty shops. Spencer's was the only mall store selling items you could only find there because Amazon was still largely unknown and selling only books. If you had a landline, a computer, an America Online installation disk, and a printer, you could get poor directions from online map services. Ask Jeeves was overtaken by the search engine Google. Personal computer gaming was on the edge of moving from niche to mainstream. Console gaming was about to explode with the generation-defining Halo. Hot Topic fueled a resurgent goth fad, which helped alternative music become more mainstream and influence social trends. Social media allowed users more control of their pages, which fueled fads like Scene Kids and emo. Many bands built followings through their own social pages. The Matrix brought dark geekiness to a peak and made computers seem cool. The iPod launched and changed music for a decade before being superseded by the iPhone. I can't believe they split the iTunes store into several apps. We also knew extreme weather would increase if we did not make serious efforts to fight climate change. We knew cancer rates would rise. We knew wildfires were becoming more frequent. We knew a lot of things, but we were more concerned with debating whether gay people should have equal rights. We cared more about tracking when a starlet would turn 18, canceling country stars who questioned the war, and calling French fries freedom fries because France did not fully support the war. We were repeating mistakes from Vietnam, but we were too distracted by other things. Oh, and Harry Potter was still popular and gave many kids a reason to read. Story 39. After the September 11, 2001 attacks, I felt that the overall mood in the world became much darker. Story 40. I feel like people texted and called way more. Those were your only options for communication after all. No Snapchat or Instagram messages. Some of us got really good at texting without looking at the keys on our flip phones. Using the internet was an experience. It was common for three of us to gather around a desktop to just wander the web. The internet was a place you could explore, not just the same 5 or 6 websites and companies to switch between. Gaming was advancing at an insane rate. Super Smash Bros. For Nintendo 64 and Super Smash Bros. Melee were barely 2 years apart, and our leagues different in every way. Graphically and in content, the jump in quality was absurd. Also, many companies were willing to make a game based on a weird idea. They were not always good, but they were not trying to start a revolution just to make a game. That is basically what independent developers do now, if I had to compare. I was pretty young. I was born in 1996, but I remember it well. Oh God. And they kept changing televisions and digital versatile discs for some reason. One year it was all about high-definition digital versatile discs, then Blu-ray discs. One year you wanted the biggest, chunkiest television, and the next you could mount it on the wall. It is actually hard to describe just how fast technology was moving at the time. Story 41. I don't remember much. There was too much techno, clubbing, alcohol, drugs, and sex. I am clean today. Story 42. The Lord of the Rings films were huge. They were released at the end of 2001, 2002, and 2003. Eminem was extremely popular. 50 Cent emerged in 2003. G-Unit were very popular from 2004 onwards until Kanye West took over. Story 43. Having a cell phone was neat but not necessary. My parents shared a phone and I had a prepaid phone. I was born in 1985. My teenage years were fun. Story 44. We need to draw the line between the year 2000 and the period after September 11, 2001. The year 2000 had gelled. Spiked hair and music ranging from the Backstreet Boys to Papa Roach and Eminem. After September 11, 2001, fear masqueraded as patriotism. Jingoistic country music, Green Day's American Idiot, and then crunk music from Lil Jon, Chingy, and Ludacris. September 11, 2001 was the defining event of the early 2000s from my perspective as a young Christian white American. Everything shifted from excessively goofy, gaudy, fisheye lens, futuristic alien imagery to gritty reboots of franchises that had become silly. Batman used to be fun. Now it is dark and gray, and the villain gets away. Robin Hood used to be fun. Not anymore. Pop punk shifted from prankish, party-focused themes to overtly political songs explicitly opposing President George W. Bush. Boy bands declined. Nu metal rose. I am a musician, so I experience culture primarily through music. Story 45. Computers were the swing. Hey, what is your screen name? I will sign on as soon as I get home. Laughing out loud. Story 46. The political climate remains difficult because of the September 11, 2001 attacks and the wars that followed. Americans became divided over those wars, and the current intensity of conflict is excessive. Story 47. There was a Tuesday when the entire world changed. After that, everything was terrible. Story 48. Some of my friends were at war overseas. Some died. Others were being dragged into a pit of heroin and oxycodone they could not climb out of. My parents had recently divorced and they were really bad at co-parenting. The economy crashed twice. I had no direction. I graduated high school in 2003 and I was lost. I had no guidance in college and I dropped out. I started using drugs, beginning with Percocet and then heroin. After that, it was all downhill. From 2000 to 2015, ages 15 to 30, were the worst years of my life. There is a line from the song If I Had by Eminem that describes it perfectly. My daughter wants to throw the ball, but I am too stressed to play. With half my life, I threw the rest away. Story 49, it was my late childhood, and it felt like an extension of the 90s. We already had the internet for a few years, and major new inventions were released. We spent a lot of time outside, and the online world did not dominate our real lives. It was still the era of Eurodance and club holidays in Spain. Laugh out loud. I am from Europe. Story 50. The internet was a vibe, more like a second hangout spot when you were not at school or could not hang out outside with friends. Few people argued or caused trouble, and when they did, the issues were usually resolved before they got out of hand. It is not like nowadays, when being online sometimes feels like a chore. Story 51. Fuck. I feel old. I graduated high school in 2002 and college in 2007. We went to the movies, carried huge bags of compact discs, had dollar beer nights, girls wore low-rise jeans and thongs, we had great music, the red dirt scene was taking off with cross-Canadian ragweed, and we were at war. Cell phones were new, and texting was a pain in the ass. We grew up with technology, but we were told you would not have a calculator in your pocket. Home computers and laptops were a new thing. Story 52. Fucking great from 2000 to 2001. Then the shit was about as bad as it could get. Story 53. I was a poor, small-town kid back then. Life was simple. Products were cheaper and most people were ordinary. We had weird sunglasses and listened to the Zac Brown band. Cars didn't have massive screens in the dash. Kids played outside and came home when the streetlights turned on. We had bicycles with cards in the spokes and built ramps for them. Wealthier families had a garage to hang out in, and a good audio setup was a stack of amplifiers, compact disc players, tape deck players, and massive speakers. My friends and I actually talked to each other instead of messing around on flip phones. We would fist fight, apologize, and do it all again. I was a kid back then, and life was more fun. Story 54. The wars were never ending. I remember thinking we would never get out of Afghanistan. Many people feared additional attacks after the September 11th attacks and became very anxious. Technology was expensive, error-prone, and fragile. Laws in the United States felt out of control. The Patriot Act, No Child Left Behind, and the rise of the Transportation Security Administration, among others. Personally, I thought the aesthetic of music and pop culture at the time was not as strong as in the 1990s. I cannot put my finger on what it was, but it did not seem as thoughtful or considered. The Space Shuttle Columbia disaster was terrible, and Hurricane Katrina that followed was even worse. Story 55. September 11th, 2001, was terrible and cast a pall over the early 2000s. We started the war on terror. People felt very unsafe. Story 56. We were all grooving to Who Let the Dogs Out, and then September 11th, 2001 changed everything. Story 57. Remember when my parents bought me Grand Theft Auto, Vice City for the PlayStation 2? I had friends over to play, and it became a big deal in the small town where we lived. People acted like it was scandalous, and video games were treated like the devil. Story 58. Like warm apple pie. Wait, American Pie came out in 1999. We struck a balance between the sexism that came before us and still having fun and getting together. Young people now seem like sexless automatons. That unsettles me. Story 59. It was the period between the pre-internet and post-internet eras. Felt simpler. The internet was new and rapidly growing but limited. Most homes had one computer that was slow, and websites were basic. It had a Wild West feel. There were no regulations or rules, but bandwidth and data were limited. At the same time, social interactions were still personal. There were no massive online social networks or communities. Instead, forums existed and were divided among many niches. People interacted and talked more in person. Few people had cell phones. They had just become affordable and were used mainly for calls and text messages. The world felt vast and unknown. Now, with so much information, it sometimes feels like we know everything and nothing at the same time. People used to be more social. Now it feels lonelier. Story 60. A livable dial-up tone. Teenager in a very rural county in the 2000s. Story 61. I cannot judge some things as I was born in 1990, but the way people communicated online was completely different. There were fewer toxic people and less identity group behavior based on politics, race, gender, and so on, so people were less guarded. Nowadays you see collectivists everywhere, but in the past people were more individualistic. People used many more websites. You might have a list of niche sites that were popular, such as Ain't It Cool News for movie news or eBaum's World for funny videos. Over time, those sites were consolidated by a few juggernauts such as Twitter and Reddit. Before social media became popular, you would often have hours after school with nothing to fill them except sitting in front of the television and watching music videos, SportsCenter, or cartoons. Censorship occupied a different place in society compared to when it later became associated with young progressives. Back then, it was mainly associated with older right-wing religious people who seemed out of touch. Picture Eminem at his peak, one of the most popular artists among teenagers, with religious groups telling him to swear less. It made those groups seem out of touch. There was a blatant sex sells period with pop stars like Britney Spears and Christina Aguilera, and there was not the same controversy about whether it was offensive to women. At the time, the political right was more likely to react, for example, to Janet Jackson's wardrobe incident at the Super Bowl or to criticize the Dixie Chicks for opposing President George W. Bush. The political left still focused on environmentalism, gun control, and abortion rights, and so on, but overall they were less extreme and more willing to tolerate opposing views. It was the peak era for reality television, with shows like American Idol and Survivor, though there were many low-quality programs as well. Rock music was more popular, with new bands popping up all the time. Comedy stars such as Jim Carrey, mostly before the 2000s, Adam Sandler, and Will Ferrell dominated, and there were breakout R-rated comedies. Superhero movies and intellectual property adaptations were a big thing, but they were less interconnected than in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Story 62. It was different from now. Some people had cell phones. My parents didn't know where I was. Story 63. The internet was not that fast. Nokia phones were the iPhones of their time. There were more outdoor activities for kids. Story 64. The biggest differences, I would say, were that cell phones were not widespread. Many people had them, but they did not dominate life as they do now. The internet was slower. There was still a monoculture. I think it died out around 2005. Video stores and music stores were still common. People still had landline phones with answering machines, so it could be more difficult to reach someone. Appointment television was still common. People made sure to be in front of the television at a certain time to watch Friends or Emergency Room. Story 65. Racing off the school bus to watch SpongeBob. Playing outside if it was sunny. Playing inside if it was not. Video games or watching movies on video home system or digital versatile disc. The internet was still a mystery in terms of what you could find on it. It felt much more genuine, blogs and small fan-made websites for everything. Monetization has utterly ruined the landscape of today's internet. You would pick up the house phone to call a friend and get hit with the dial-up noise. I knew all the neighbors and the kids up and down the road. You would head off and come across a bunch of them playing and join in, even if you only knew one of them. Walking into the corner shop, $3 was enough to buy a huge paper bag of lollies and a drink. Every kid suddenly had a mobile phone around 2004 or 2005, but no money to call anyone, so texting took off instead. If someone was glued to their phone, then it was because they were in a conversation with another human being, not because they were browsing the web. Microsoft Network Messenger got huge for a bit. You would get home from school hoping to see if the girl you liked had messaged you. One morning, Mom woke us early before school and showed us the television footage of the towers falling in New York. I remember she was just saying, "Oh shit, the Americans are going to go to war." And they did. They showed people in desert towns cheering and burning American flags. The news every night for ages showed soldiers walking through cities in the desert, and sometimes showed stories about the prisoners they took, standing around in jumpsuits with black bags on their heads. There was lots of good music. Eminem was so popular. The kids at school said his real voice was so deep, but there was no video anyone could show to prove it because YouTube did not exist yet. It was a pretty good time, to be honest. There are so many things to miss from those days. The world has decided that money, excess, and control are the newest religions. Story 66. There were a lot of ads on television for ringtones of musical instrument digital interface quality and phone wallpapers you would pay to download. Frosted tips and baggy jeans were a thing. We put terrible wings and neon lights on our cars along with 50 kilograms of audio equipment. Xbox Live was life and Halo 2 was a hobby. Story 67. Compact discs were still common, but Napster and LimeWire had just become popular. Story 68. In 1997, the United States was at its peak. It has been trending downward ever since. Story 69. Many positive comments were posted. Let me add something negative and specific. The metal genre was in a horrendous state at that time. Story 70. It was just right. There was enough technology without it consuming our lives. Social life was good too, with less violence and fewer drug addicts. There was some drug use, but the number of addicts increased significantly. Story 71. We had it all. Gas was $20 to $30 for a full tank. You could get a cheeseburger for $1. MySpace let you blast your friends with your shit music on repeat. Story 72. It was a lot of fun. Dance music was the best. Bronzer and glitter were great. I applied both liberally when clubbing as a gay man. Story 73. First there were the September 11th attacks. War followed. Then everything went to absolute shit with Facebook and the Great Recession. Story 74. It is shit compared to the early 1990s. I will tell you that much. Story 75. Many feared that all computers would stop working on New Year's Day, January 1st, 2000. They almost did. Some failed 1 year later because of a similar calendar bug. Story 76. Those were definitely good times. We had cell phones, but unlimited calling was only available after 9 p.m. We hung out in chat rooms and downloaded music from LimeWire. I loved playing cards on Yahoo Games. The only late-night food available after midnight was Taco Bell, and it felt different. Politics were crazy. The George W. Bush versus Al Gore election was messy because of Florida. Then the attacks of September 11th, 2001 occurred, and suddenly we were all united as Americans. The iPod Video and the iPod Touch were released and kind of changed the technology game. Google also began to gain traction, but Yahoo was still king, in my humble opinion. Story 77. Like the 1990s, except there was new metal and it was terrible. Story 78. Advancements in technology used to be much more dramatic and apparent to consumers. Upgrading your personal computer every 1 to 2 years was necessary to play the latest games. Now you can get by with a gaming personal computer from 7 or more years ago without compromising much. In contrast, it was difficult to play Doom 3 from 2004 on late 1990s hardware. The leaps in cell phone technology between 2001 and the first iPhone were enormous. For more than 10 years, companies have mostly refined the same formula. Earlier, they were more experimental with new technology, and some were successful while others were not. Online communities used to be much more secluded. Now they are largely centralized on Reddit and Discord. Story 79. Type of day. Woke up to an alarm clock. It was too loud. Got dressed. Breakfast or not. Drove in the car with Blink 182, Stone Sour, some 41 Marilyn Manson, Daft Punk at full volume. Went to see friends. What will we do on Saturday? Okay. Everybody at my home at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Met another group that included girls. Had fun together in my garden. Met my best friend, just the two of us. Drove around and talked about the world. Went back home. Played online a little. The online service was not reliable enough to play much. Communities had around 500 people. I was in the top 3, so I had a reputation. If streaming had existed, I probably would have been famous. I was already well known. We were more chatting than playing because of the poor internet quality. Went to bed and read a comic or manga. Saturday, doorbell rings. Played video games together. Split screen, local cooperative, player versus player. Better than online. Went out with all the friends to a pub at night. Sunday. Met my oldest friend and went biking together. We stopped in a large park and shared food. Then we went home and gamed together. Homework fit in between, and sometimes we visited family. A normal week. I was, and still am, the biggest gamer in the groups I have been in. When I was alone, I played. I could write more, but this is the idea. The idea was internet, playing and meeting people, downloading. That was it most of the time. Social networks were not common. Blogs existed but were more of a joke. Internet relay chat was more interesting for meeting people. Life was simple. We met that day at that time and maybe nobody would be there. If you were a good person and people liked to meet you, they would show up or apologize sincerely. Was it better? Is there anything more important than your current life, since it is the only one you will live? What you are living now is the best time because it is yours. As everyone, we live many different lives or adventures. I cannot remember which season or arc of my life I am in. There have already been many adventures, and the best are yet to come. We heard a heartbeat in her this morning. Story 80. Those years were overshadowed by the September 11th, 2001 attacks and the wars that followed. They were good times before that. The innocence of life has been lost with the internet. Story 81. It was not perfect, but it was a fun time for music and for being a kid. Nickelodeon was at its peak. Story 82. The first 3 years of the 2000s consisted of Counter-Strike 1.6, StarCraft, Brood War, and Ragnarok Online. My roommate and I were grinding Ragnarok Online while having a beer in our respective rooms. In the mid-2000s, there was a lot of World of Warcraft and beer. I met people through Facebook, MySpace, and early dating apps before they were monetized. That was definitely the golden age of free dating apps. I spent a lot of money on karting and track days back then. Gas prices were low, used car prices were reasonable, and car parts were cheap. I crashed 2 Toyota MR2s due to snap oversteer, then owned a Honda S2000 and a Mazda RX-7. If I had known those cars' prices would skyrocket, I would never have sold them for $5,000 and $8,000. Story 83. It had the perfect balance between real life and social media. Politics was a bit more humane. Life was just better. Story 84. As a 9-year-old, I played a ton of GameCube with my friends, especially Super Smash Bros. To figure out what new games were coming out, I subscribed to a magazine called Nintendo Power that arrived by mail. It had reviews of current games, letters from readers, and it caught you up on the Electronic Entertainment Expo and all the new releases. Movie franchises had peak variety, especially for kids my age. We had the Star Wars prequels, Pirates of the Caribbean, Shrek 1 and 2, Sam Raimi's Spider-Man films, Harry Potter, and many kid-focused blockbusters that were a bit dopey but fun. Pixar was also at the top of its game. Now it feels like everything for kids is either superhero or animated. All the children's live-action films now go straight to streaming. I remember Hole's Agent Cody Banks, Spy Kids, and The Princess Diaries. In the background, I always saw reports about Iraq on the television because my mother had Fox News on all the time. It affected the young psyche. Unfortunately, it instilled in many of us children the idea that Muslims were terrorists and that they wanted to destroy America. Nickelodeon and Cartoon Network were at the top of their game with programming. Nicktoons from that era were so good that most of them received theatrical films. Story 85. Social media existed but was not used as a serious mode of communication. Nexopia or Internexus was probably the coolest thing at the time. Decorating your profile was the main activity and a way to show how seen you were. The emos were branching out. It was not until about 2007 or 2008, for me anyway, that things got heavier online. Facebook arrived, and suddenly you could see what everyone was doing most of the time. Some people documented everything on Facebook. Whenever we hung out, my friend brought a camera to take pictures, and they always ended up on Facebook. Order a pizza? Post it on Facebook. Have a drink? Post it on Facebook. Lots of people did this either out of motivation or because they did not have anything else to do. By around 2010, I got my first smartphone and found myself scrolling for the first time. Many nights before bed, My girlfriend and I would share memes we found. It has gotten out of hand now, especially since everyone just gets ripped off for the memes. There is no sense in trying to claim anything, as it gets reposted in no time. I don't know. It doesn't feel the same to use the internet as it once did. Now you can just watch your ex move on, get married, and have kids without you. Story 86. Early 2000s. Pagers and early cell phones existed, but minutes and messages were limited. The internet existed, but forums were more popular for communities versus the social media of today. Game consoles were around, but not nearly as accepted. There were many great parties and limited digital evidence. Cameras existed, but you mostly still used film, and disposable cameras were popular. You could be out with no way to be contacted. Pay at the pump was limited, so if you needed gas you had to go to a 24-hour gas station or fill up early. It was a great time to be a kid or young adult. Technology was becoming prevalent but not ubiquitous. You still hung out in person and at parties without all the drama of everything being broadcast, recorded, and saved. The internet was more raw and less commercialized. Serious topics were often on niche sites. There were many more sites and competitors instead of a few huge companies that run everything. Even the first version of Facebook was only for college students at your specific school. Later, they let you connect to other schools, then opened it to non-students and family members. We used it to talk about parties, classes, and studying. I had to clean a lot off my page when it became public. It was like a live yearbook and messaging platform, and it did not completely suck as a college student at that time. Burning compact discs, discovering music. It was great. Hanging out at malls was still common. There was violence and guns, but guns were less available than they are today. Receiving things in the mail or packages was rare. You had to get things from the store. Story 87. That atmosphere was strange. The attacks on September 11, 2001 were a massive event in the United States, and they defined how much of that generation thought. Everyone was on edge and expecting another terrorist attack, and being even slightly critical of the country felt akin to being a traitor. At the same time, there was a great deal of hope, idealism, and a positive outlook about the future. Most people were eagerly anticipating the rise of the internet and increases in computing power. Many events were interpreted as signs of progress. People hoped that technology could advance immensely over the next decade and that we might reach the levels imagined in Back to the Future Part 2. However, as information about what was happening in the Middle East began to leak out and people realized it would become a quagmire, it seemed very likely that someone had manipulated public opinion so we would support a war in Iraq to secure more oil. Public disillusionment grew, but that shift only really took off after the early 2000s, around 2006 to 2008, with 2005 a reasonable cutoff. Story 88. It was pretty good. I was 6 at the turn of the millennium and experienced a large part of my childhood in the early 2000s. As others have said, the world was becoming more digital and connected, and it felt like we struck the right balance between using the internet and remaining physically present. My generation got the best of both worlds. We grew up with technology and can utilize it as it develops, yet we still appreciate the importance of physical interactions and not being constantly online. Story 89. Amazing. I was born in 2001, and what changed the most, in my opinion, is how much freedom children had. When I was growing up, it was normal for children to wander around the city all day, hang out with friends, and stay outside until the streetlights came on. Today, parents seem to want to watch their children all the time. I understand wanting to make sure a child is safe, but I loved that my parents trusted me enough to let me go outside on my own. If I have children someday, I would not feel comfortable letting them go outside on their own anymore, because it seems few people do that now and there must be a reason. Story 90. In the United States, we overcorrected our patriotism after the attacks of September 11, 2001. People who do not remember that era may not realize how much the American flag was revered. Local politicians were berated for not wearing a flag on their lapel. Almost every house flew an American flag, and those that did not were ostracized by their communities. It became excessive, and I am glad that attitude moderated over time. Story 91. It started with panic. The September 11th attacks happened, and there was a feeling of dread for a while. Everyone became very patriotic. Story 92. Due to the September 11th, 2001 attacks, there was a lot of hate and anger toward Muslim communities. America came together, but sadly that unity turned into hostility toward Muslim people because of the actions of extremists. At the same time, the Stargate franchise was running. Stargate SG-1 and Stargate Atlantis were popular. Deadliest Catch, Mythbusters, and Dirty Jobs began airing. Wrestlers Stone Cold Steve Austin and Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson retired from active wrestling. Story 93. You could breathe without worrying about every piece of your data being hacked and tracked to death. Story 94. Rock music wasn't dead then. Life was still tumultuous because of the September 11th, 2001 attacks and the war in Iraq. Young kids could still hold conversations with adults and weren't terrified of social interactions. Today they look at anyone 10 years older than they are as if they are aliens. Story 95. As a kid it was bliss. There was a great balance between technology and the outdoors for my own entertainment. During the day I was outside and at night I played games. Story 96. There was an optimism that simply does not exist today. No matter what happened, it felt like everything would be okay in the end. I cannot remember the last time I felt it. Story 97. I was only 8 at the beginning of the 2000s, but I remember the internet being the Wild West. I liked the music from the late 1990s and early 2000s. I would not say it was rosy because of course it is when you are a kid laughing out loud. Story 98. I turned 16 in 2000, and for me it was blurry, fuzzy, and a lot of fun. Story 99. There used to be a greater variety of games. Development costs were lower, and advertising costs were not higher than development costs. Companies, publishers, and investors were more willing to take risks. Now everyone is copying successful titles, releasing annual versions of cash cow games, or remaking old franchises. Story 100. One big difference was that computers and the internet were considered a boyish thing. None of the girls were online. Some parents were very restrictive about internet use and personal computers. A good personal computer for playing most games was still expensive. I think in my class from 2000 to 2005 about 5 boys owned a desktop personal computer with internet access. My 2 friends had one. The personal computer was constantly on. We would chat there because text messages and phone calls were expensive. Everything that people now do on their phones was done on a desktop personal computer. It sat in the corner of my room, Winamp playing MPEG-1 audio layer 3 files, messages popping up, and we played Quake, Half-Life, Counter-Strike, StarCraft, Total Annihilation, and later Rome, Total War when we had free time. Everyone was smoking cigarettes or chewing bubble gum constantly. Story 101. Cell phones did not have texting, and flat-screen televisions were not common. We still had wooden box televisions around the year 2000, often with videocassette recorders built in. Above all, Arby's had a 5-for-5 deal on roast beef sandwiches and beef and cheddars. Story 102. Everyone in our cul-de-sac knew each other. We would knock on the doors of our neighbors when we wanted to hang out and spend as much time as possible outside. Story 103. People used Microsoft Network Messenger. Telecommunications companies offered free text message weekends. Phone plans offered, for example, 50 talk minutes between numbers on the same company network and 200 text messages. Dial-up internet was common. Broadband was the hottest new thing, and you would start a download for Warcraft 3, The Frozen Throne, and hope it finished by the time you woke up the next day. Story 104. Technology was reeling from the pain of the dot-com market bust. The companies that survived tried to elevate themselves through aggressive marketing to users, for example Facebook after the bust and Amazon before it. Mobile phones stagnated until the introduction of the iPhone in 2007. There was little online mobile commerce before then. Music from the 1990s remained very popular because it was far better. Low interest rates and unethical behavior on Wall Street after the dot-com bust led to massive deleveraging over the next 8 years. Nobody went to jail for that. Story 105. Imagine life without social media. That's about it. There was a good balance between digital life and real life. Gamer culture was emerging through the gaming community. World of Warcraft was in its early years. We had access to Napster and torrents, and nu metal was dominating radio and music television. Personally, I was a gamer and a nu metal kid, and I had a sense of belonging to a culture and a community. Life was good. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.